So as a wrap-up to the inquiry method, just want to use this slide to go over some pretty important bullets to consider as you're preparing and as you're instructing using the inquiry methodology. First, and we mentioned this at the beginning about developing a hypothesis, as with any inquiry, to start with a good inquiry question that pushes a hypothesis. Some of them will be hypotheses with definitive responses. Some of them will be kind of an open hypothesis that you're just working with and you're trying to define it more clearly. That's kind of the point based on the content. I would encourage both, to explore both. An inquiry lesson that has a definitive hypothesis, such as science and math, or certainly the highly engaged inquiry lessons really push student thinking, so that hypothesis is a cornerstone for teaching inquiry. Second bullet here really is talking about letting them explore. You'll hear oftentimes inquiry referenced in today's modern classrooms, discovery learning. It's the same, it's synonymous. But I've seen so many teachers come in and say, okay, here's what we're going to do, here's what you're going to do, and here's what you're going to think, and here's what you're going to write down. And you've just taught through the actual inquisitiveness of the lesson. So don't overteach it at the front end. If they're asking questions, what do we do next? That's good. That's good. In contrast to classroom management that needs to be very transparent and consistent, your pedagogy can be kind of always pushing them to ask questions and, what do we do next? So, if your management skills are predictable, that's good. That means you're consistent. If your instructional skills are predictable, that's probably not a good thing. And inquiry can really keep you from having that predictable instruction that, I know exactly what this teacher's going to do 5 minutes into class. I know exactly what they're going to do 10 minutes into class. So allowing students to explore is extraordinarily important, and don't overteach the front end of the lesson. Helping them collect and organize their data. Some of that can become overwhelming to different learning styles. So I always argue that a teacher's responsibility is really 90% just helping students organize their thinking. Inquiry is going to present them with a question that they may or may not want to know the answer to, but oftentimes if it's a safe question, they'll want to collect the data. But if they can't organize it and they get lost in the organization of the data, then that's going to allow the inquiry lesson to kind of fall apart. So that's the front end planning as well, is you want to consider not only your inquiry question and maybe what's going to stimulate data source, but also how they're going to organize their data. Are you going to use a thinking map, a Venn diagram, a graphic organizer? What might be the most useful way of students organizing their data collection? And then linking that data back to the original hypothesis. That's where a good set of questions can really scaffold students up to, okay, look at your original hypothesis, now look at the data. What can you elaborate based on your original hypothesis? What's changed? And those are kind of where the aha moments show up. Is, oh, okay, I see what you're talking about. Now you may have to help. They may immediately see the linkage and the connection, and they may not. So again, having a prep set of questions that help them link that data back to their original hypothesis and seeing it maybe in a more elaborate perspective or a clearer understanding is extremely important. And then what is based on the data, based on your original hypothesis, what can we conclude about the research? What can we conclude about, like if I use my original lesson about effective teaching, what can we conclude is an effective teacher? And there may be multiple variables. Not every teacher has mastered every variable, but if they have all those variables and they're working professionally towards mastering those variables, then they're probably going to be effective. That's something maybe we can draw a conclusion based on the data. Your planning and organization is up front. That's really what I think you'll probably see consistently as we work with every one of these methods is, you're doing all the work before class starts, and the students are doing all the work while class is in session. I think that's where learning starts. It's where it takes place. If you're doing all the work in class, then they're not learning anything. So, but you can maybe, I don't know if you can be over-organized in regards to student inquiry, but I think what I would suggest is just to be careful about not over-teaching it. You can be organized, and you can have maybe more strategies than you necessarily need to help students organize their data, or you may have more data sources than you actually need. Your timeline may be a little bit too structured for an open inquiry. You might fine-tune some of those things. Just be careful with the over-teaching at the front end. I've seen students who have experimented with inquiry once. Maybe they had over-organized, or certainly, usually it's typically they've under-organized, gone in, and the lesson kind of fell apart on them, and now all of a sudden they don't want to teach inquiry anymore. And I'm thinking, really? So you're going to abandon, ship after the first bad lesson? And of course, we know this from just being teachers, and first period being different than second period. What you did with first period, you may have to refine for third period, or you may have to refine for the class that's right before lunch or right after lunch. So, just continue to work with it, experiment with it, and inquiry is such a highly effective and highly engaging method that I think you'll find it as being one of the more useful methodological tools that you will use for your entire profession.